Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia. Today, listeners, I'm excited to be chatting with January Gilchrist, a Brisbane-based author and mother of two whose debut thriller, The Final Chapter, was recently published by HQ Fiction. An atmospheric locked room thriller reminiscent of an Agatha Christie novel, The Final Chapter was inspired by January's stint at the prestigious Varuna Writers' House in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, and her desire to write about women reclaiming their own narratives. Compelling, page-turning, and a little spooky, this book was right up my alley. A thoroughly enjoyable read, which has been aptly described as Benjamin Stevenson meets Nine Perfect Strangers. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, January.
Thank you for such a wonderful intro. That was very nice. Thank you.
My pleasure. Now, before we get into the details of the book, I wondered if you could set the scene a little bit for us. When did you go to Varuna? What were you working on? And when did the idea for the final chapter strike you?
Oh, good questions. In 2021, I was fortunate enough to receive a space. I think we refer to this as winning a spot because you do have to apply. It is very competitive. I've been joking on the book tour saying that I think maybe like Desley says, oh, maybe there was two Desleys and they got them confused. I'm saying maybe there was two Januaries who applied at the same time and they chose me. I was working on a historical Gothic novel, which was not going well. So it seemed like the perfect opportunity, a secluded house in a cold atmosphere. You know, they're very open. The house is haunted. It's one of the first things they say to you when you enter is Eleanor Dark was so kind to donate the house to the Arts Council on her death, and she remains here with us. So I thought perfect setting to really get into this Gothic, gloomy Gothic historical. The idea for the final chapter came to me pretty much from the moment the taxi driver stopped at the side of the road and said, I don't go up that driveway. It's overgrown, it's winding, it's pothole. It really is as I describe it in the book. So I was dragging my suitcase along this potholed driveway going, okay, right, this is feeling very atmospheric. And just started marinating probably right from the moment that that house erupted around the corner. And I went, oh, this is interesting. It really is the last house at the end of the street, backs onto the forest. There was a moment where I stood and thought, am I in the right place? Is this okay? As a woman, we always have those fears of, am I safe here? Is this okay to do? And I remember standing on that street going, is this right? Am I just going to walk into somebody's? But it was correct. It was Varuna.
Fantastic. So for those who don't know, so for those who might be listening to this podcast thinking, what is Varuna? It is an institution devoted to the development of literature in Australia. It offers residential programs for writers on a merit-based application process, which is what you referred to earlier. It is very competitive. It is very hard to gain a place at Varuna. So well done you. That's fantastic, because a Varuna stay for any writer is both highly coveted and regarded. And as you said, the house, which originally belonged to Eleanor and Eric Dark, was ultimately donated to the Australian public to be used as a writer's retreat. And so, I guess I was just trying to get into your sort of thinking, like when you get there and you were working on this historical novel, which you said wasn't going very well. So did you continue to work on that novel while you were there, or did you push that aside for a little bit and start to write notes about this book?
I continued to write the Gothic historical, but every night, they have quite a few rules to really support writers just getting focused and staying focused. So there's no phone calls between certain hours. The rooms are also, the walls are quite thin. So you are in this small room, you are really writing, and then they have the most incredible cook Absolutely. Everybody loves Sheila. And anybody who's ever been to Varuna will say, yes, Sheila's food's amazing. And one of the things they really encourage is that you spend dinner together and then you're free to go back to your room if you want. But every night we would sit around in the lounge after dinner, and most of the people there had been to Varuna before. So they had lots of stories for me about the ghosts, about badly behaved writers who were there before us. And we just started, I guess, chatting about the history and their experiences. And I am unashamedly obsessed with Agatha Christie, and I have been my whole life. I grew up reading Nancy Drew, Trixie Bell, and I really love to solve the puzzle before the author shares it with us. And I just kept thinking, this is the perfect locked room mystery because I don't know these people. They say they're writers, but what if one of them wasn't? There was also a snowstorm predicted while I was there, which added a little to the claustrophobic feeling of the house because there was a little anxiety between us all. We were all talking about it. Well, how do we get home? Everybody was not from Sydney, so everyone was traveling away to get there. And so there was a lot of discussion. Well, what will we do? How will we get, the taxis won't even come up the driveway. How do we get to the train station? How do we get out? So that claustrophobic feeling of being in the house with strangers, a snowstorm's coming, these stories that I kept hearing, which were, too wild to put in the book. Yeah, so it just started marinating, I guess is the perfect word for it.
I want to get into all of those things that you just mentioned, but for the benefit of those who haven't yet read this wonderful novel, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the story.
Yes, so there's 5 writers who go to an exclusive writers' retreat in the Blue Mountains, very heavily set around, based on Varuna. But I always am very clear and say, not the writers and not the staff. So just the setting. The people are lovely, certainly not like the ones in the book. So 5 writers go to this exclusive writers' retreat, and there is a snowstorm. They get trapped, and then one of them ends up dead, and they realize they are not just trapped by the snow, but they're actually trapped in the house with a murderer. In my book, the forest that surrounds the retreat is also the ex-hunting ground of Australia's most notorious serial killer. So I wanted to really tap into some real fears of, is there someone outside? As well as those, what was that noise? Is that the ghost? Or is that somebody inside? So just to add that kind of claustrophobic, deliciously gothic feeling.
What struck me in this story, January, and I guess reflective of the fact that, as you say, the writer's stuck in this house until the snowstorm passes, is the fact that the house and its layout is a very prominent aspect. So I guess I wanted to ask you how much of the layout and features of Ramusia instead of Varuna in the book is fact versus fiction.
It's a lovely house, Varuna. Remnusia, not so much. So I think I really leaned into the age and the heritage of the house, but instead of it being a comfortable writer's retreat, I thought, well, nobody wants to read a book where everyone turns up and everyone's lovely and the bed's super comfy. So I also really wanted to use the house as kind of speaking to this competitiveness that the writers feel with each other. So one writer gets a better room and she has a good desk and a comfortable chair. And then one writer is using a discarded garden set, that really just to kind of bring in that you're feeling like you're not good enough. And here is the setting around you that's also telling you you're not good enough. So no, Varuna's lovely.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yes, I know. I always do try to make that really clear. I'm sorry, Varuna.
With any retreat in which people have to pause their everyday lives to be there, each of the women writers in this story have their own backstory and what ultimately leads them to wanting to be at a writer's retreat of this nature at this point in time. So we have Maya, we have Desley, and we have Colette. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about each of them.
So Maya, Desley, and Colette really are archetypes of the type of writers that you will find in the industry. Colette is a celebrity or celebrity adjacent author. She does not care about writing. She couldn't really take it or leave it. But because she's married to a famous man, she's a New York Times bestseller. And then we have Maya, who tried her hand. She's very young, very attractive. She tried her hand at writing. And oh, look, she got, I think it's Australia's biggest advance for a debut author ever. And she subsequently walked around like Elle Woods, like, what? It's hard. And then there's poor Desley, who's every other writer, 98% of us. Doing it for the love. Yes, we are Desley. Desley is us. We are doing it because there is a story inside us that needs to be told. We're doing it because we love writing. We're not making any money. We're feeling terribly in terms of comparing ourselves to these celebrities and these successful young, attractive debuts like Maya, really finding herself lacking.
I cheekily just put my hand up while you were talking about Desley then, because I really connected with Desley, the character that kind of most reflected my writerly persona. And I think you encapsulated so well the fact that she suffered terribly from imposter syndrome, that despite already having been published, she convinced herself that it was possibly a mistake that she was invited to Ramnesia, and that the other writers would all find out that she's not a real writer. And she consistently downplayed her writing and the genre in which she was writing.
Genre was very important to that point.
Absolutely. And I think with Desi, what you've done so brilliantly is that you've plugged into the fear and anxiety that the majority of writers have. Was this something you particularly wanted to explore in this novel?
Yes. So something that came up when I was there, I am a commercial or a genre writer. That was the first time that I had experienced the way that literary writers talk about and perceive commercial or genre writers, and the upturned lip of Maya when she said, Ruro, oh, cute, really is something that I have experienced myself. I think crime and romance are, even though they are arguably the most successful genre, they are the most put down genre. Other authors, I recently went to a very, very successful crime writer talk, and the author in question said he knew he wanted to write a book, but he didn't think he was very good. So he thought he'd start with something easy like crime. And my heart really sank. I thought, oh, it's not easy. It's really hard to write a book. And there seems to be this perception that romance or crime is very easily written and almost not worthy of accolades, prizes, or respect. Desley is experiencing that, and I think it maybe you relate to it because you've experienced it. I know I've certainly experienced it.
So well said, January. That's a real thing, the snobbery associated with genre writing. And I've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast before with other writers. I interview a lot of romance writers. I interview a lot of crime writers. And yeah, you definitely get the feeling that you're certainly second class and third class citizens in the scheme of writerly achievements.
Yeah.
Now, like Desley, I'm a mum, and I know from experience it can be hard to put boundaries around time devoted to writing when other responsibilities call, especially for something that you have no idea will end up paying any dividends in terms of an offer of publication or even any income. You've got no idea whether it's going to be successful. But in Desley's case too, her husband, Scott, is not supportive at all, and I don't think he places any value on Desley's writing career and sees it as more of a nuisance to him. So tell me a little bit about this and why this was important to Desley's character.
I mean, what you've said is just, I think, something we all battle with. Taking time away from the family, taking time away from spending it with your children, or even just taking time away from your chores, the things that, that ever-growing to-do list, because I call it screaming into the void. I don't know if anyone's ever going to read this. I don't know if I'm wasting my time. I don't know if I'm delusional thinking that this, I think hopefully I'm not alone. It's so hard to read your own work and say, oh, this is good, or I'm on the right track. I write and I'm thinking, is this anything? So I really wanted to explore that for myself as well, because at the time I did have to take a week away from my children to go and write this novel that, again, it's cost me money to go to the retreat, even though it is competitive and it is quote unquote one, you do still have to contribute financially to it. So, it's the flights from Queensland, it's the cost of the retreat, it's now my husband caring for the children. Are we paying for after school care? There's a lot of money involved that I think is a barrier for women when we don't have data to say to people, this is my job, because it wasn't a job for me at the time. It's a hobby because it's not earning any money. So then to spend all of this money and to take time away from the family, and like most people, I have a full-time job. So you also then have to take time away from your actual paying job. So it's very fraught, and I can see why a lot of women just give up on that dream. So I wanted Desley to be experiencing those things, but showing that this is something, because I'm sure you agree, Claudine, why can't we just let it go? Why? Our lives would be so much easier. Our lives would be exponentially easier if we just did not write anymore. We'd have so much more free time. We'd have better paying jobs, So why don't we let it go? Because there's a story inside us, or there's something inside us, this burning desire to create. So I really wanted to bring that into Desley, because otherwise, why doesn't she just quit? Why doesn't she just go home and keep caring for her kids? So I wanted to her, because when we do meet Desley, she's really struggling with her mental health. And I did want to show that there was a little bit of fire in there. There was still a part of her old self burning.
Indeed. So very well said, January. And I think of all the characters, I completely agree with you. She is in a pretty vulnerable space when she gets to the Blue Mountains. She's not only feeling very down on herself, but feeling sad about having to leave the kids with her husband, who clearly was not happy about the fact that she was going away. Despite having labeled 14 meals, of course, he still rang her because he couldn't find anything, making her feel even worse than she already did about the fact that she was taking a week for herself. And I think that's what women struggle with, particularly when we still have children in the home. We struggle with the idea of giving ourselves the space and the time to devote to something that we are very passionate about. So it tends to fall within the cracks of time that we might have. I've spoken to women who are writing books on their phones while they're watching their kids doing soccer practice, or they're staying up late into the night, or they're waking up at 4 a.m, well before anybody's awake, because it's the only time that they're going to have. So they're foregoing sleep in order to pursue something they're so passionate about. So there's all of these things that are wrapped up in Desley, which is why I say to you that she felt so real to me. She was the character I most definitely identified with. And I think further to that, she's the one that has the biggest, most dramatic arc and experiences the most change. Was this a deliberate thing for you?
I fell in love with Desley. I started out thinking, she's just going to be just one of those drab, sad sacks, always feeling sorry for herself. But I really, somewhere along the line, I think maybe the truth of my experience got so tightly woven with her. I really wanted her to have this big character arc because, as I said before, we are Desley, Desley is us. Don't we want to win in the end? Don't we want it to have all been for something? Because one of the fears for me as a writer is I'm wasting my time. This is pointless. There's nothing's ever going to, and I know so many beautiful, wonderful writers that can't get published just simply because the market's not publishing that at the moment, or they don't have the contacts, or, it's not always just that you're the most amazing writer. It is a machine. It is a corporation. It is a business. So I just really wanted to give people who see themselves in Desley, or see Desley in them, a little bit of hope. Like, yes, we hang on to our dreams and we do the invisible work, because that's how it feels to me. The invisible work that's almost laying the foundation for that house. Maybe it's 5 years' time, maybe it's a year's time, but it is right now where, yeah, we're working in the future, which it's so hard to keep motivated.
I couldn't agree with you more, January, and thank you so much for that. Albert Einstein said that genius is 1% talent and 99% hard work. And whilst I would mostly agree with that, I think in Maya's case, someone who exudes such raw talent, the scales may have tipped in the other direction for her. And as you said quite eloquently earlier, she's someone for whom success has come relatively easily at a very young age. And I can think of a few writers here in Australia I know who are like that, and they kind of infuriate the rest of us. But at the same time,
Yes, they do.
they garner respect for their obvious talent. But she too had her own issues to confront, didn't she?
She did. In my experience, this kind of author is the most unkind, particularly to older women. I've had all sorts of comments leveled at me, and I find myself, because there is no frame of reference, I think they just look at us and think, I'd never let myself XYZ, put on weight, focus on the children, be treated like that by a husband. And that's great. We were all like that at 23, and then life happens. And so what I wanted to do was try and understand. She is unkind, she is arrogant, but try and understand what's driving that. I don't believe that people are intrinsically, good or bad or mean to be unkind. And the experiences I think that I've had with these really successful, instant overnight success young authors, I'm sure if I sat them down and said, hey, when you said that to me, this is how it made me feel, they'd be horrified. They don't mean to, but they don't have that frame of reference that we do. Maya likes Maya, but we needed to like her as well.
Now, Colette, I was super intrigued by, and her story reminded me of a very high profile media couple and their subsequent divorce that kind of like was splashed across television networks and newspapers maybe a few years ago. Am I wrong in imagining that they might have been inspiration for Colette's story?
You are correct. And a little bit of a politician who was also in the media at the same time, with finding out that their mistress was pregnant and subsequently leaving the wife. That was in the headlines at the time. And I was so angry at how the media was portraying a woman who had done nothing but what we are told we should do: sacrifice your career. She was a very successful journalist in her own right, who did make a choice to support her husband and raise the family. And probably I don't know her from a bar of soap, but I can only assume she had her own feelings about that. And then, through absolutely no fault of her own, is photographed taking the bins out. And I think I even write about that exact moment. I remember seeing the Sunday night, she's left her sanctuary, her house, her safe space to take the bins out, and someone's taken a paparazzi shot of her. No wonder he's left her. And then they also use a clearly set up paparazzi photo with the new girlfriend, who looks fabulous because she knows she's being photographed. So there's hair and makeup and she looks wonderful. And I thought, how unfair it is that this girlfriend knew he was married when they began. And it's definitely his fault. He was the one who was married. So I'm certainly not blaming her. It's 100% his fault. She knew he was married. The only person who really is an innocent victim is the one who's been treated the worst. And I was so angry at how, instead of talking about this politician's bad behavior, we were discussing the wife. Actually, we should be holding these men accountable for this behavior. And unfortunately, it lies squarely on the wife. And I wondered if, until the moment these wives found out about the babies, had they thought their life was perfect? Were they happy? Were they blindsided? And then to have your most deepest, most hurtful moment laid out on the papers and the internet. Yeah, I felt I had quite a few feelings about, yeah, they were in the paper at the same time. So yes, you are correct. Very inspired.
I had a lot of feelings about both of those scenarios at the same time. And as a woman who also gave up a legal career for my family's security, safety, happiness, all of those things, it was a decision I made in conjunction with my husband. And I remember saying to my husband, oh my God, If that happened to me, I'd be completely ropeable and
And devastated.
devastated. Yeah.
Everything you've worked, everything you have told yourself you are sacrificing. Okay, doesn't matter. I could have been a really successful, really well-respected journalist, but I made this choice. We made this choice because
We
he
made this
also,
choice.
we
Yes.
made this choice. And then it's like the promise between the writer and the reader. He's made a promise. This is what we're working towards. And then he's turned around and really publicly like, just kidding, and left her with very little options. You can't go back in time and become a successful journalist. That she's lost that. And I think that was the arc that I wanted to follow with Colette, is because also some of the commentary, some of those articles were written by women. That also made me really angry. And I guess somewhere along the line, we have to stop and say, men really want to pit us against each other. And I think that's the biggest theme of this book, is these women are holding men's secrets. And while they believe that they have to, their lives will never be what they could be. But the minute they let the men's secrets go, that's when their lives really change, because they're living for themselves instead of the men in their lives.
Just to further that, and we can move on after that, but it infuriated me that in both those public factual cases, the men's positions and jobs weren't affected at all. They might have
Seen
suffered
as a bit of
a start, yeah, and doesn't affect their ability to do their job. Never mind that they completely ruined somebody else's life. Let's just move on. It was yesterday's news.
Onwards and upwards. And that's reflected in Laurie's character too, I think, that he should be cancelled. He should have been cancelled decades ago, actually. But because he's considered genius, because he's, a man of a certain era, a white man of a certain era, people go, oh, well, that's just how he is. Oh, that's just, they're from a different time. I hear that a lot. Oh, well, he's from a different era. Well, he lives in this era now. So
I wondered, just tangentially to that, have you had any pushback or commentary on this part of your story?
No, I've only actually had very positive feedback. I think most women know of people who have experienced this or have seen it and feel the same as us, that it's infuriating.
January, you spend a lot of time laying down the foundations for this mystery, throwing suspicion on each of the characters and their potential motivations for murder. So I wanted to ask you, did you know who the culprit was before you started writing, or did you start writing and then it came to you as you were going along?
I love this question because no, I had no idea who the murderer was.
Love it.
I am firmly a pantser, as they call it, writing by the seat of your pants. I think of writing all my stories like a rainbow. So at one end, I really had this cast of characters. I knew who I wanted to write about, and then I knew who was going to die. And everything on that rainbow was as much a surprise to me as it was to you. So yes, there were moments where I was like, oh, okay. So in the beginning, I definitely had to give everybody the opportunity to be the murderer because I wasn't sure who it was.
Now, I've done a few writing retreats in my time, and I've spoken at length on the podcast in previous episodes about how much I love writing retreats. And I've always absolutely reveled in the chance to take myself away from everyday life and simply immerse myself in writing. But on this retreat, there's not much writing being done, is there?
Hardly anybody puts fingertips to keyboard. And I don't know if you picked up on it, but there's a really specific reason for each and every one of them to have never been. Like, I don't know if we ever see a scene of anybody writing. And every single one of them has a really specific reason for that. Can't tell you what any of those are because they're all spoilers.
In some ways, I think the use of the weather, the isolated location of Ramnesia do much to distract the attending writers. There's these power blackouts, there's the cold, there's the lack of Wi-Fi. There's so many things that work against them. I mean, even if they were inclined to sit down and actually do any work.
None of them were, so luckily.
You've used all these external factors as really great distractions. And was this deliberate?
Yes. So this is my first contemporary novel. So writing a contemporary, I had to be really like, well, why doesn't one of them just pick up the phone and call the police? There's nothing worse than when you're watching a slasher film and they run upstairs into the house to get away from the murderer. And you're like, no, or they don't just pick up the phone. So I wanted there to be really specific reasons why they couldn't just do that, as well as, yeah, why isn't anyone writing on this writer's retreat? That's not really why any of them are there. Or maybe Desley, but she's got terrible writer's block.
You mentioned it just now that while the final chapter isn't your first foray into fiction, you had another novel published earlier this year in the historical space. So was this the novel that you're working on while you were at Varuna?
Yes, it did get published. And I think it's just something so fabulous that they're published in the same year. One took me 2 years, maybe even longer to write. And one, I mean, the final chapter just flew. It was so joyous to write. It was so easy. There's so much content, I think, as well in it, that it was maybe 6 months from deciding to put my fingertips to the keyboard to thinking, yeah, okay, I'm done. Just so quick for me. I know other people write like that, but I definitely don't.
That's amazing. I love hearing stories like that, January. And you describe yourself as a suspense writer, but you have a predisposition for Gothic suspense. So I kind of wondered what made this genre particularly attractive to you.
I love Gothic. Like, that is my jam. I just love how, is it your mental health because you've been slowly poisoned by the lead paint in your house? Is it a woman locked in the attic? Or is it a ghost? That really Victorian Gothic slow decline, that creeping dread. I really enjoy that. As I said before, I really love Agatha Christie, and I think she's, the queen, obviously. And I wanted to, when I intended to write this book, because I'd only ever written historical, I did intend to write it as a kind of Agatha Christie era, maybe when Eleanor Dark, like maybe in the house at her time. But these characters just kept coming back as really contemporary. So I thought I wanted to do a really Gothic, that Agatha Christie style locked room, but with a sharp, modern, very Australian edge. So hopefully I got that.
The Gothic and the supernatural elements in this story really intrigued me. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. We have the ghost of Evelyn Thorne, who is said to be haunting Ramnusia, because I've never stayed at Varuna. I didn't actually know that that was based on fact.
Oh, yes. The minute you walk in the door at the induction, which is nothing like the induction that these writers go through, by the way, at the induction, they say to you, Eleanor Dark lives on here in the house. So that, I think, was the real jump for this book, because it's a setup. If you hadn't told me that, I would assume that creaking noise is merely an old house moving, or I would assume those footsteps I hear are another writer. But you've almost, the power of suggestion, you've just told me it's a ghost. So any noise you hear subsequently, you find yourself kind of jumping at shadows thinking, what was that? What was that? We kept saying things like every morning, anybody experience the ghost? Anyone see the ghost?
Oh my goodness. That's a very well kept secret, because I have spoken to a number of people who've stayed at Varuna and not one person has ever mentioned that to me.
Really?
Yeah. My question was, please tell me that this is made up. Like when you said it earlier, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't experience anything, but they had recently had the house smoked by an Indigenous elder. Apparently the ghost had become bothersome. So they had the house done a traditional smoking ceremony to move the spirits on. So they did tell us that as well. And we're not sure if she's still here. Yeah, it was amazing.
Further to that, there is a theory that Ramnusia operates on, and it's a theory of not having two male poets staying at the house at the same time. So is this made up or is this factual as well?
This is made up. Can you imagine? I just love the idea that poets are supposed to see the beauty. They're supposed to be kind of more in touch with us regular people, that in some way their emotional intelligence is so elevated that they can only see the beauty and the pain in life. And I just really love the idea that they're actually the worst of everybody, and that you can't possibly have two of them because their egos are so big that, who knows what will happen.
I think you were wrong in this respect, particularly with the two poets in question here. We've got Tavis, young, good-looking guy. And then we've got Laurie, the old school two-time poet laureate, two men who couldn't be more different. So, yeah, I was very intrigued by this idea of, not having two male poets. I don't really know very many poets, so I don't really understand their characters, I guess.
I don't know any poets either, any male poets. What I was trying to do with Tavis and Laurie was actually having them the same but different. So they are the exact same. They're two male poets. They're both very good looking. So while we dislike Laurie because of his personality, he was a very handsome man about town, the same way that Tavis is now. And I wanted to really create a juxtaposition between Tavis, who is actively rejecting the patriarchy, is actively kind of not engaging in this toxic masculinity. And yet we have his kind of older counterpart who is the epitome of toxic masculinity, I think. So, yeah, I really wanted to have them two sides of the same coin. So sorry to any male poets. I'm sure they're all fabulous. And there is a line when Tavis is just kind of blowing Maya's mind with his beautiful eloquence. Don't we all want a well-spoken, emotionally intelligent man? And I love the idea that is how Laurie was getting women into bed back in the day, but it didn't mean anything to him. And maybe we question, well, does it mean something to Tavis? Or is he doing the exact same thing, using his beautiful use of language to trick women into bed with him? He might be a murderer. We don't know.
No. As I said, you've thrown some great red herrings out there. I think we have cause to suspect everybody in this murder mystery. Yeah, absolutely.
Like Agatha Christie, I wanted to start the book with everybody has reason and potential, and then just slowly, one by one, picking them off. You can discount, okay, that person definitely didn't do it. Okay, that person definitely didn't do it, until that final moment. So I still wanted to kind of have, it still could be those three, or it still could be those two, before you land on who it was.
You talked a little about toxic masculinity just now, and that is a bit of a dark theme that is running through this story, particularly with the character of Laurie and his inappropriate behavior towards women. And more these days we seem to learn about inappropriate behavior of artists who are often venerated, celebrated, idolized. And we were talking about those two figures, one a politician, one a media celebrity. For fans, it can be really difficult to reconcile or separate out the art from the artist. And for Colette in particular, Laurie's behaviour towards her when she was a younger journalist, because she had met him before, was inexcusable. But like many before her, she overlooks it. But she's in a different space now, and she no longer looks at him the same way, does she?
No. And that's, I think, an important point, to have had that interaction between them earlier, and that maybe a little sense of shame for Colette, like, oh, I participated in that. I enabled this man. And I think that comes back to these female journalists writing these articles, making the victim the villain. And think maybe we've all participated in some way. And I touched on it before. I think men really need women to be against each other, because if we did join forces, we would be an unstoppable force. So I think it is a tool of the patriarchy. I was also playing with the can't have two male poets, because quite often, I've grown up hearing, oh, well, when you have a female boss or too many women in the team, and, work in HR, it's all full of women, so bitchy, so, can't handle too many women. So I think that is a patriarchal tool to control us. And if we think that our competition's the woman in the room, we ignore the bad behavior of the men. So I really wanted to make it's the men's egos that we can't have two men here, because it's your egos, it's your inability to control yourself that really is the thing that affects everybody.
There is a character in this book who doesn't actually appear on the page at all. It's a character called Lily. And when I saw this name on the page, I experienced a bit of a jolt, because there was an Australian writer by this name that I'm sure was known to lots of other writers in our community. I wondered if you could tell us why you named this character Lily Raiety.
I met Lily at a book event years ago here in Melbourne, and we just really connected. She was such a support, such an incredible support for Australian authors. And she was really active in the Bookstagrammer community, book reviews. really just such a shining light. And unfortunately, right when I was getting my final edits, she shared with the book community that she had terminal cancer. I was devastated, not being her closest friend, but having connected with her over the years that we'd known each other, I've considered her a friend. And not being in her state, I felt very removed. And I know that she was an aspiring writer and that she had been very, very supportive of my own work and my own journey. And she had helped me quite a lot work through an issue that I'd had and was such a support and kept checking in with me. And it just felt like a gift that I could give her that would maybe, just something to make her smile. So yeah, it all came out right when I was doing my final edits, and I thought this is the perfect opportunity for me to do that. But unfortunately, there isn't many likable characters in the book. So I didn't want to give one of these terrible characters her name. That's why she's not technically in the book, because I did want to keep her, and she is the perfect kind of, again, can't give too much away about her because there's spoilers in that too, but she is somebody that I think Lily would have personally really been thrilled to have been likened to.
She's immortalized in your book, which is wonderful.
Yes, yeah, it is. And I think she'd really love that. I love the idea, just from my own heart. I love the idea that she's on lots of people's bookshelves now. Like, she lives on with us through words, which I just think was her life's purpose as well. So that feels really special.
As I mentioned, the final chapter isn't your first novel. In fact, you mentioned it as well, but it's certainly the first in the contemporary thriller space. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to publication with the first novel and what made you change from historical to contemporary.
Good question. So back in 2019, I was studying my Bachelor of Creative Arts. And as part of that, I took, obviously, it was also creative writing. I was doing a creative writing class. And my lecturer, the incredible Laura Alvery, who was a stunning author herself, read my assignment and said, "Oh, so you're a writer?" And I said, "Oh, no, embarrassing, absolutely not." And she was like, "I just read your work. You're definitely a writer." I said, "No, no, no, I'm not. No, I'm not." And she said, "Well, if you were going to write a story, what would you write about?" And I must have given her 100 ideas. I've got so many ideas. And she said, "Okay, you're a writer." And she changed my assessment for the course to start writing a book. So instead of just doing these kind of short things that everybody else was doing, mine was just to keep pressing forward and writing a book. One night I was doom scrolling on Instagram, and somebody had shared a landing page of congratulations, you're in. And they had submitted their work to the Ritual Prize for emerging writers. And I thought, "Oh, what's that?" I'll have a look at that. And it was 11:21 p.m. And I thought, "Oh, well, I should enter because I'm an emerging writer. I might share this piece that I've been writing for my uni." And then it noticed that the submissions ended that evening at midnight. So I had to frantically spend the next however many minutes tidying it up, putting the grammar, making sure it was, exactly right. And at 11:59, I pressed send and forgot all about it, never thought about it again, because what were the chances? They get thousands of applications a year or submissions a year. And then one day somebody emailed me and said, "Congratulations, you've been longlisted for the Ritual." I was like, "What? Me? That's amazing." Was there two Januaries? That was an incredible boost and really encouraged me to keep writing. And quite often I say, I don't know that I would have kept writing if it hadn't been for that, because it is like screaming into the void, because it is so much sitting down and wondering if anybody's ever going to read it. And that manuscript became my first published piece, which was a digital first with HarperCollins called The Lady Detective. And then I wrote another one. So that kind of genre, the Americans call cozy, but cozy means something different in Australia. So I always tell people it's historical romantic comedy, and that people get a little bit more. So then I wrote another historical romantic comedy, which was published in America. And then I decided to write something a little more serious. which was the historical Gothic. And I don't know why it never occurred to me. It sounds so crazy now, but it's almost like dating. I was dating those other genres. And then as soon as I started writing in this genre, I'm like, oh, I've met the man I'm going to marry. I find this genre so pleasurable. There's so much joy in writing it. You can get really deep with current themes. So even though, yes, it's a murder mystery, we've talked about these much deeper themes about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a wife, in a way that I couldn't really touch in historical, because I don't know what those things mean in those days. I have dated the other genres, but now I found the one I want to marry, and it is contemporary mystery. I love it so much.
That is brilliant, dating other genres. So to that end, do you think you'll continue to write contemporary? And specifically, I wanted to know, will any of these characters make a comeback?
Wow, I just went to the Currumbin Crime Writers Festival, and something did occur to me then. I thought, wouldn't it be fun if Desley, she's the keynote speaker, she's finally getting somewhere, and then yet she kind of, we come back to this, do you ever leave? Does the imposter syndrome ever leave? Or do you just keep meeting more successful people, more people being unpleasant and more people making you feel murderous? And I did make a joke, like, actually, maybe Desley could come to the Currumbin Crime Festival. But I'm definitely sticking with the contemporary genre. I'm almost finished on my next manuscript, which is very much in the same theme. I'm calling it Dame Agatha Goes to Love Island.
Ooh.
So we have people who think they're going to film a reality TV show about fixing their floundering relationships, kind of either stay with your partner or hook up with someone new, but then they start dying. So it's a little more Survivor or Squid Game than Love Island.
I love the sound of that. But I do also love the sound of Desley going to a festival and feeling inadequate all over again. Because I've got to say to you, I've spoken to hundreds of writers now through the podcast and other commitments. And so often people get their deal, they're a debut author, they get their deal and they feel like they've climbed, they've had this really hard slog, they've got to the pinnacle, only to realize that there's an even higher mountain to climb. So there's consistently,
and above that mountain.
Yeah. So there just never seems to be a point where people feel like they've achieved what they needed to achieve, but no sooner do they get where they think they want to be, that there is yet another obstacle or another, mountain to climb, so to speak. So I totally get that Desley might very well feel like that. She's, been successful in getting to be invited to a crime festival, but then you meet everybody else.
Yes, and I think something that I touch on in this book too, just because we're all writers doesn't mean we're all being nice and friendly to each other. Yes. There is a lot of scarcity mindset. There is a lot of competition. There can be fabulous, welcoming, supportive people, and there can be people who will shut the door in your face in the hopes of keeping their own star on the rise or making sure that their next book is going to be published over yours. In truth, we are all in competition. There are only so many books on the shelf, and some people don't see it that way, and some people very much do.
So do you believe that a rising tide floats all boats?
Yes, I do, very much so. And there has been people who have helped me along who didn't need to. I mean, Trent Dalton blurbed my cover.
Amazing.
Right? Trent Dalton is kind of busy. He's got a lot on. There was absolutely no reason for him to take time out of his busy schedule to read and blurb my book. And he did it knowing that what he was doing for me was an enormous gift. He could be forgiven for saying no to everybody, because I'm sure everybody asks him and everybody wants something from him, because to be aligned with, and I get that's why sometimes looking at the human nature of this industry, it does sometimes feel like as a lowly debut, people don't want to talk to you, or as that lowly romance writer, nobody wants to talk to you. It can very much feel like that. So when you do experience that generosity, and I mean, that is just the way that I live my life. If I can help in any way, I always would. So yeah, I do 100%, and not just because I'm on a podcast. I very, very much believe a rising tide floats all boats.
Oh, I love that, because I believe it too. It is very hard to sustain that belief sometimes when you're in the querying trenches and you're not having any success. But I think ultimately everybody finds their place.
I agree. And I also know from my own experiences, you might have a win and then your friend has a win. And I know that I'm just as excited for my friends when they have their wins as I am for myself when I get a win. So I love surrounding myself with cheerleaders and people who feel the same, because it is a really hard, lonely, like you are in a solitary and you are screaming into the void alone. Will anybody ever read it? So you really do need to align yourself with people who are going to say, yes, keep going, or that's really funny, or love that idea, well done, just to sustain yourself.
January, given all of your experiences to date, if you had any tips for writers looking to break into publishing?
Oh, find something else. No, just kidding. Find something else to do. Find another hobby. Marry rich. I did hear somebody recently give that advice. If you want to be a full-time author, make sure you've married somebody wealthy. We are joking, but I do think my advice would be to have other things in your life, because adjacent to what we were just talking about, that competitive, nasty. I mean, I've heard some wild stories. I've heard about writers who invent fake Goodreads accounts and one-star their competitors' books. And I've even heard that an author who damages other authors' books in the bookstore, so people won't buy it because the cover's bent. And, these are really nasty, terrible things to do. I wonder if that comes from that, that fear that we all experience, this nobody's ever going to read my book. I also think these people tend to not have anything else going on in their life. And if you have other hobbies, other interests, friends outside writing, you don't have time to obsess about writing, because it is a slow process. And if you think you're sitting down to write this book and sending off the first draft and then being published next year, you got some reality checks coming your way. So you need to be still living your full and rich and wonderful life that writing can be a part of, rather than when I'm published, when I get my deal, that's when I will have a rich and full and fabulous life. So that's my only advice. Get a life.
I think that is probably the most unique piece of advice I've received on the podcast to date, but I love it nonetheless. January, I've absolutely loved chatting with you about this highly entertaining, compulsive novel. I wish you every success with it, and thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you so, so much for having me. It is a dream come true.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.